Late afternoon at Monterey's harbor, the fog drifted lazily as if it were trying to stretch the distance between Marina and the rest of the world. Her little bookshop, the Wild Lantern, nestled between an aging flower store and a generations-old cobbler's shop, remained open like always. Warm yellow light spilled from the glass windows, softening the ripples of a past she had never truly let go of. Marina Ellis was wiping down the familiar corner table with a linen cloth, the one where her son, Leo, often sat to do his homework after school. Half-priced old books rested quietly in a wicker basket beside the shelf, like forgotten stories, much like her own life. "Mom, I got an A+ in language arts today!" Leo's voice rang out from behind the bookshelf, drawing a quiet smile from Marina. "Well then, we have to celebrate," she said, putting down the cloth and turning to face him, his tousled brown hair and bright eyes beaming. "A hot chocolate and double cinnamon waffles?" Leo nodded, as if that were the greatest thing in the world. Marina poured milk into a saucepan and turned on the stove, a rare peace settling over her like a soft shawl. Then the doorbell rang, and that peace shattered into quiet shards. A mail carrier stood outside, holding an envelope sealed in shimmering silver wax, the unmistakable mark of her mother, Eloise Ellis. "Miss Marina Ellis?" he asked. "Delivery from the Ellis estate." Marina took the envelope silently, her eyes lingering on the sweeping, elegant handwriting across the front. Inside was a cream-colored invitation with embossed lettering and gold trim. The engagement party of Selena Ellis, her younger sister, was to be held at the family estate the following weekend. A final handwritten line glinted in metallic ink. "Family is family, Marina. I do hope you'll come, for Leo's sake too." "Mother?" Marina closed the envelope, her heart tangled in threads of unease. She knew full well this invitation wasn't about kinship. In Eloise's world, everything was performance, and Marina, whether she liked it or not, had once been a character cut from the script. Marina stood still at the window, the envelope still resting in her hand. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, revealing a soft blush on the harbor's horizon. She could feel Leo's eyes on her, watching from behind the bookshelf. "Are you okay, Mom?" Leo asked softly, stepping closer. Marina gave a slight shake of her head. "It's an invitation, Aunt Selena's engagement party." The boy frowned. "The aunt who tells me to speak more quietly at the dinner table?" Marina let out a soft chuckle. "That's the one." Leo plopped down on the velvet-upholstered chair near the fireplace. "Do we have to go?" Marina sat across from him, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the embossed card. "I'm not sure yet, but your grandmother said she hopes you'll come." Leo was quiet for a while before he asked, "Did she say why they never come to my birthday parties?" A lump formed in Marina's throat. She reached out and brushed a hand through his hair. "They live differently, but it's not your fault. You are the best thing that's ever happened to me." Leo nodded, as if accepting a truth he'd already come to understand. Then he added, his voice small but certain, "If you don't want to go, we can stay home. I can make cupcakes with Aunt Jenna." Marina smiled, though her eyes were far away. "I think it's time you saw where I grew up. You have a right to know who your family is, even if it's just once." Leo said nothing more. He stood, walked over to his backpack, and quietly began packing. One book, one stuffed walrus, and a broken pencil. An item Marina knew he wouldn't use, but always carried, just in case. 3 days later, Marina drove along the winding road toward the suburban enclave of Stonevine Heights, where the Ellis estate still stood, unchanged, unmoved, like time had never dared touch it. Fiery red maple trees lined both sides like tall, unmoving sentinels. "Whoa," Leo breathed as the towering iron gates and moss-covered stone fence came into view. It looks like a castle from a storybook. Marina said nothing. Her hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel as the car rolled through the gate. The very gate she had walked away from in silence, one bitter winter night. The mansion rose ahead like an old postcard, steep tiled roof, carved balconies, and crystal-clear glass windows. On the front steps, uniformed staff bustled about, arranging floral displays and name cards for the engagement seating. A slender woman with silver hair stepped out from the main corridor. Eloise Ellis. She wore a cream-colored coat, a pearl brooch pinned to her lapel, lips painted a muted red, the image of someone who refused to acknowledge that time had dared alter her. "Marina?" Her voice was even, cool as morning frost. "Mother," Marina replied quietly, then turned to her son. "This is Leo." Eloise glanced down at the child, her eyes sweeping quickly from head to toe. "He's taller than I expected, a bit thin. Is he eating properly?" Leo nodded, but his small hand squeezed Marina's tightly. Marina offered a polite smile. "He's healthy and smart. I think that's enough." Eloise straightened up. "In any case, thank you for coming. Selena will be pleased." She turned, her tone unchanged. "Your rooms are on the 3rd floor, south wing. The housekeeper will show you up." Marina followed, feeling an old fog rise in her chest. The house was as silent as it had been the day she left, but the air was different now. The small hand in hers reminded her, this time, she wasn't walking in alone. Marina was double-checking the luggage in their guest room on the 3rd floor when she heard a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she called, not looking up. The door creaked open, and then a warm, familiar voice filled the space, halting Marina's hands mid-motion. "Well, I don't believe it." She turned around, and there he was, standing in the doorway, eyes wide with recognition. Damian Hart. He looked the same as always. Dark brown hair, neatly styled, white shirt slightly wrinkled at the elbows, and that look of surprise, though not because he was seeing a stranger, but because he was seeing someone he never expected. Here. "What are you doing here?" he asked, half laughing. "You're Marina?" She smiled gently. "Hello, Damian." He took a step into the room, then paused. "You're part of the Ellis family?" Marina nodded slowly. "Eloise's eldest daughter." Damian leaned back slightly, hand covering his mouth, clearly trying to connect the dots. "So, you're that Marina. Marina Ellis. Not just Marina from the Wild Lantern." She nodded again, her smile still faint, her eyes a little distant. "Not many people know that." Damian sank onto the edge of the window seat, exhaling a long breath. "My God! I've been going to your cafe for nearly 2 years. God knows how many espressos I've downed there, how many architectural models I've sketched next to that old laptop you always dust quietly. And I never once asked your last name." "And I never offered it," Marina said softly. "And Leo." Damian looked up slowly. "He's Selena's nephew?" "He's my son," Marina replied. "Whether this family chooses to see him that way is another matter entirely." Damian shook his head, a mix of confusion and admiration in his expression. "I remember him asking to sit next to me a few times, wanted to learn about ship design, said he wanted to be a marine engineer. And every time he said that," Marina added, "you'd bring him an extra cocoa with whipped cream. He loved that." Damian laughed. "So did I. Your cafe. It felt like the only place I didn't have to perform." Silence settled between them, easy but charged. "So?" he asked slowly. "What brought you back?" "My mother's invitation," Marina answered. "And Leo. He deserves to know where he comes from, even if it's far from perfect." Damian nodded thoughtfully, then looked at her for a long moment. I feel like I've missed something important. For not asking my last name? She teased gently. For not realizing sooner, Damian replied, serious now. That there was something about you and Leo that kept pulling me back to the Wild Lantern week after week, and it wasn't the coffee. This time, Marina laughed, genuine and full. Damian stood, hands in his pockets. I'm glad you're here, truly. Thank you, Marina said. You're the first person at this whole event who's welcomed me. By name, not by glance. They looked at each other a moment longer, and then Damian gave a small nod, like a bow to someone familiar, but never quite properly introduced. Marina walked slowly down the marble corridor, quiet as a shadow of memory drifting through familiar halls. The scent of floor wax and lavender mingled in the air, stirring images of long-ago evenings when she and her sister were forced to rehearse table etiquette in the sitting room, always under their mother's sharp, assessing gaze. Laughter drifted out from the drawing room, sharp, sweet, and deliberate. No, Mother. Selena's voice purred, every word drawn out like syrup over polished silver. She doesn't need to be a bridesmaid. She doesn't even need a dress. Just a seat far enough away to stay out of the photos. Marina paused beside the half-open door, fingers brushing against the dark wood frame, but said nothing. I think we're being generous just inviting her, Selena continued, swirling a glass of wine between her fingers. I mean, come on, vanishes for years, then shows up unannounced, dragging along a child no one even knows the father of. Eloise let out a long, graceful exhale. You're far too kind, Selena. I'm only worried what the press might say if they find out there's an extra branch on our family tree. Extra? Selena laughed. Mother, that branch dried up long ago. It only dropped in again because a gust of wind blew it back. Marina gripped the edge of the frame, spine held like steel. Eloise's voice floated through the air, light as lace. And where were you thinking of seating your sister for the engagement party? Farthest from the stage, Selena said without hesitation, lips curling. As close to the kitchen as possible. Where she belongs. A ripple of laughter, sharp as broken glass, cut through the air. Marina pushed the door open, not suddenly, not dramatically, but her presence silenced the room like a curtain falling mid-performance. Sorry, she said, her voice calm, almost amused. I just came down to get some water for Leo. Didn't mean to interrupt. Tea between two queens. Eloise stood up, offering a half-smile like a well-rehearsed ritual. Marina, you're a bit late. Selena reclined back into the velvet armchair, legs crossed. You still remember where the kitchen is? I figured after all these years, you might have forgotten. It's hard to forget the places you've been shoved into, Marina replied, eyes locked on her sister. Selena smirked. Still sharp, I see. Good, just don't bring that bitterness into my engagement, will you? We wouldn't want the air too heavy with unresolved grievances. You don't have to worry, Marina said evenly. I didn't bring bitterness, just the truth. Eloise stepped forward, resting a light hand on Selena's shoulder, like a queen shielding her chosen heir. Everyone has their own version of the truth, dear. But remember, here, the official version belongs to the ones who stay. The ones who leave don't get to rewrite history. Marina smiled faintly, but her eyes were clear and cold, sharp as cut glass. Then maybe it's time people heard another version. She stepped back toward the doorway, turned slightly, but paused before leaving. Oh, and Selena, your dress is lovely, but don't worry, I won't outshine you. Real light doesn't need a white gown to be seen. And with that, she walked out, leaving behind a room that suddenly felt too still, like a long shuttered window had just been flung open after a bitter winter. Night fell over the Ellis estate with an eerie stillness, a kind of silence crafted from etiquette, rigid schedules, and whispers muffled in crystal glasses. Marina sat alone on the old armchair out on the third-floor balcony, where warm bedroom light spilled across a cooling cup of tea. Below, the garden blurred in shadows. Only the wind rustling the hedges and the distant footsteps of a staff member checking the lawn lights could be heard. Leo had been asleep for hours, clutching his stuffed walrus, the same one Marina had sewn on lonely nights back in Monterey. She leaned her head against the chair's back, eyes gazing into the speckled black sky. And then, like a sudden gust through memory's closed window, it all came rushing back, vivid, raw, and merciless. 4 years earlier. Marina stood in the cold, marble-tiled kitchen of the estate one late winter night. She had just returned from a year of study in Paris, full of hope, carrying the naive remnants of a first love with a Canadian music student named Julian. They had fallen for each other like characters in a springtime song, recklessly and without a plan. Then Marina found out she was pregnant. Julian had promised to come back. He said he'd transfer schools, find work, do whatever it took to raise the child together. But then a scholarship in Berlin swept him away, and his promises dissolved into polite silence. When Marina told her mother everything, Eloise didn't shout. She simply stopped chewing her biscotti. Then she exhaled and set her utensils down, each movement deliberate, as if handling a piece of delicate porcelain. "Do you know what your father would think?" Marina didn't answer. "He'll never forgive this, and you'll drag the Ellis name into disgrace." Eloise rose from the table, dabbed her lips with a cloth napkin. "We'll make arrangements. You'll take a year off for health reasons. Then the baby will go to a proper family. You'll still have a future, Marina. I'm helping you." "I'm not giving up my child," Marina whispered. "I'm keeping him." Her mother looked up then, for the first time that evening, her eyes cold and sharp like untampered steel. "Then starting tomorrow, don't call this place home." Marina remembered herself at 22, 3 months pregnant, standing at the front gate in the dead of night, suitcase in hand. No tears, no pleas, just bare feet moving forward, whispering to herself that silence could be its own act of rebellion. She had gone to Monterey, to the coastal bookshop where she once interned over summer. The elderly owner took her in, let her stay in exchange for helping run the shop, making coffee, sweeping floors. In that first month, Marina slept in the storeroom among crates of old books. By the third, she was on the lease, renamed the place the Wild Lantern, and began a new life with Leo. Back in the present, Marina exhaled slowly. She had once believed she'd moved past it all, but sitting here again, in the house that once cast her out, she realized some wounds don't disappear. They're simply tucked away until something or someone unlocks them. She turned to look back into the room. Leo slept peacefully, tousled brown hair spilling across his forehead. He was the living proof of a choice she had never regretted, even if it cost her everything. And this time, she would not stay silent. Damian leaned against the railing behind the main garden, a glass of untouched wine in his hand. The engagement pre-party had only been underway for less than an hour, yet the air inside the grand hall already felt thick, with flowers and false compliments. He had seen families like this before in the business world, glistening on the surface, but hollow at the core. The Ellis estate was no exception. What troubled him wasn't the perfection. It was how desperately people tried to construct it by standing on someone else's shoulders. And today, that someone seemed to be Marina. From the very first moment he saw her, something hadn't aligned with what Selena and Eloise had described. They'd called her lost, an emotional burden, a ghost of poor decisions. But Marina carried something rare in their world, the calm of someone who had nothing to prove. And Leo, that boy, the way he carried himself at the dinner table, polite, attentive, never disruptive, but never meek. A child like that wasn't raised in chaos or carelessness. He had clearly been raised by someone who chose kindness over comfort, dignity over noise. "You hiding from the party?" Damian turned to find Marina stepping out into the garden, a cardigan draped loosely over her shoulders. She stood beneath the soft glow of the lanterns, no dramatic makeup, no sparkling jewelry. And yet, she brought more ease into the air than anything inside the chandelier-lit ballroom. "Just needed some air," he said, "and a break from 3 kinds of foie gras and 7 layers of pretension." Marina let out a light laugh. "Welcome to the Ellis house." Damian looked at her for a moment. "Your sister. She's not like you." "No?" Marina said gently. "I'm not like the rest." A breeze swept past them, catching the edge of her cardigan. Damian reached out instinctively, steadying the fabric. Not by accident, but not entirely on purpose either. "You used to live here?" he asked. "A long time ago?" she said, her gaze fixed on the shadows of the rose garden. "Until they decided I no longer fit the family image." Damian nodded slowly. "Selena never said much. Her mother always referred to you as a sensitive subject." Marina gave a slight shrug. "Because I didn't follow the blueprint." "Then maybe," Damian said thoughtfully, "you're the only honest one in this house." They stood in silence for a beat. Marina was quiet, but there was a clarity in her eyes that seemed to see straight through the layers he hadn't even realized he was still hiding behind. "You're marrying Selena," Marina said, not as a question, but as a quiet reminder. Damian was silent. Then he exhaled. "At first, it made sense. Then, I was persuaded. Every time I hesitated, her mother reminded me, this is a strategic match. 2 families, 2 reputations, 2 photogenic people." Marina tilted her head. "And do you believe in that?" "I'm not sure anymore." Damian turned, his eyes lingering on her. "I don't know why you came back, but I'm glad you did." Marina gave him a faint smile. "It's not to reclaim anything. I just want my son to know where he comes from, to learn that truth isn't always pretty, but it can still be beautiful." Damian nodded. Then after a pause, he asked carefully, "Can I ask you for something?" "What is it?" If someone says something later, something unkind, inappropriate, or just plain cruel, would you promise me one thing?" Marina looked at him, still. "Don't stay silent." She paused. "You mean Selena?" Damian didn't answer, but his eyes already had. Candlelight flickered across the ballroom. Soft waltz melodies flowed from the string quartet, and the wine shimmered like golden threads suspended in the air. Selena Ellis's engagement party had been orchestrated like a flawless performance, until she stepped up to the stage and reached for the microphone. Her smile bloomed like a white lily, the very flower she had personally chosen to adorn every table. Her dress hugged her frame like it had been sculpted, and every step she took was rehearsed as if for a fashion runway. At the outermost table, nearest to the exit, Marina sat with Leo. No one made conversation. No one made eye contact. As if she were an old item brought out for display at a private auction, appreciated only for its absence. The microphone buzzed lightly, drawing all eyes forward. Selena took center stage like an actress walking into the lead role of a script she had been writing for years. She wore an ivory satin gown that shimmered like silk poured over porcelain. Her makeup was immaculate. Her smile frozen at the edge of sincerity. "Good evening, everyone." The room fell silent. Damian sat on the left side of the stage, his back straight, his face unreadable. "Today is a special day. Not just because I'm marrying the most wonderful man in the world," she said, casting a sidelong glance toward Damian, "but because I have the honor of witnessing certain people re-enter our lives, as if they never left in the first place." A few glances flickered discreetly toward Marina. "And today," Selena continued, "I want to do something often overlooked at glamorous events like this, a heartfelt thank you to family. First, to my mother," she smiled, "who taught me everything about poise, standards, and how to hold one's own, in any room." Polite applause followed. Eloise gave a regal nod, her wineglass poised like a queen's scepter. "And of course," Selena said, lowering her voice as though sharing something deeply personal, "I can't forget my sister." She paused for exactly one beat, just long enough to change the air. "Not everyone is brave enough to leave home in silence, vanish for years, and return suddenly, like an old ink stain on a wedding dress." A soft, stifled laugh came from one of the guest tables. Someone had tried to suppress it and failed. Marina remained still. Leo looked up at her, his small hand tightening around hers. Selena went on, smile intact. "You chose your own path, raising a child on your own, opening a little bookshop, in a place I'm fairly sure doesn't exist on any respectable travel guide." A few guests exchanged glances. No one dared laugh aloud, but the intrigue was palpable. "And today, seeing you here," Selena said, her voice now sharp enough to cut, "I just want to say thank you. Thank you for showing me that not everyone was meant to stand in the spotlight. Some were born to sit in the audience, quietly, and if they're lucky, they might get a name drop in the acknowledgments." Damian shifted in his seat. His eyes darkened. Marina stayed seated, her spine perfectly straight, her face composed. Finally, Selena lifted her glass. "Thank you, Marina, for becoming a mirror the rest of us could reflect on. To realize that not every road to freedom is worth taking, and that not everyone who bears a child deserves to be called a mother, especially if all they did was give birth without the grace to lead." She raised her glass higher, finishing in a voice soft as silk but heavy as stone. "And sometimes, when garbage finds its way back home, it's only a reminder of how far we've come." The room was silent, utterly, unforgivingly silent. A man's voice rang out suddenly, slicing through the heavy stillness of the glittering room. "That's enough, Selena." Every head turned. Damian Hart rose from the head table. The easy smile he often wore was gone, replaced by tight lines of tension and unmistakable disappointment. He climbed the steps to the stage, stopping directly across from his fiancé, and the ballroom, now holding its collective breath. "I can't sit through another second of this," he said. "Watching you use your own engagement party to publicly humiliate someone who happens to be your own flesh and blood." Selena let out a sharp laugh, still holding her wine. "Oh, this is rich. Who are you standing up for, Damian? Some woman who ran away without a word, now crawling back just to collect pity?" Damian looked at her, his voice cold now. "Number, I'm standing up for decency. The very thing you just threw away in front of everyone in this room." Silence. Utter, ringing silence. "I used to think you were strong, intelligent, principled." He didn't look away from her, even as her perfectly composed face began to twist with anger. "But tonight, I see clearly, you're not strong. You're cruel, and your so-called success is built on cutting others down, especially those who don't fit your image." Selena clenched her wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. "So what? Who is she to you anyway? Some woman with a child no one dares name the father of, running a hole-in-the-wall cafe in Monterey, pretending that life on the fringes is noble?" Damian paused, then shook his head. Every word he spoke after that felt like a quiet, clean break. "Marina doesn't need to be praised, because she doesn't perform." He turned toward the guests, toward Marina, who still sat quietly beside Leo. Her eyes hadn't watered. They glowed not with anger, but with something far steadier, dignity. She looked not at her mother or her sister, but toward the center of the room, and there was no fear in her eyes. Perhaps only sadness. Then she stood. Leo looked up, about to stop her, but Marina leaned down and said softly, "I'm all right." Just a few words. No one stopped her as she walked up the stage. No one knew she'd once stood there before, at a graduation celebration when she was 17, after receiving a prestigious art scholarship her mother had tried to bury, fearing that a painter didn't fit the Ellis tradition. Back then, Marina had remained silent. This time, she would speak. She took the microphone. No notes, no rehearsal. "Thank you, everyone," she began. "I know I may not be the person you expected to see standing on this stage tonight." A few murmurs. Marina's gaze stayed calm. "For a long time, I thought silence was the safest way to keep peace. That if I stayed quiet, obedient, invisible, I'd be forgiven for doing what was right for my own heart." Her eyes drifted toward Eloise, still seated like stone. "I once accepted being erased from the family portrait. I thought walking away was the only way to keep the part of myself that was still human." She paused, then her voice softened. "But tonight, when my son looked up at me and asked why people can laugh while hurting others, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." The hall was so quiet, you could hear someone breathe. "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I chose differently. But what I've never lost, and what no one here can take from me, is my dignity." Marina looked at Damian. He held her gaze with something quiet and unwavering. "And I hope, on this day meant to celebrate love, that we remember, love isn't only between two people about to marry. It's how we treat the people we once called family." She set the microphone down and walked away. Applause began, not polite, not immediate, but real. Slow and steady, starting from the far left table, where an older woman, an old friend of Marina's late grandmother, clapped with quiet resolve. Then another. Then a small cluster of guests. Selena sprang from her chair, her face flushed red. "Enough!" she snapped, her voice cracking through the room. "You came here to ruin everything, didn't you? You've always been jealous of me. You can't stand to see someone else happy because you're too weak to hold on to anything." "Selena," Damian said, voice low and even. "You just did the one thing I prayed you wouldn't." He turned toward the crowd, then back to Selena, who now stood trembling, humiliated in front of everyone. "Marina is real. She's a mother who raised her child alone, a woman who chose silence over blame. And tonight, while you stood here tearing her down to elevate yourself, you showed me exactly why I can't marry you." A hush. "Selena, I think this should end here." One sentence, quiet and final, like a curtain falling. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the engagement ring, and placed it gently on the microphone stand. The soft clink echoed like a gavel. "My apologies, everyone," he said, his voice steady now. "This engagement is officially over." And then Damian walked off the stage. He didn't look back. No one stopped him. No one clapped. No one dared meet Selena's eyes, now blazing red, but emptied of all retort. Monterey, 3 weeks after the engagement party. Spring had arrived. Early lavender blooms scented the air around the wild lantern. Leo sat in the reading corner, legs swinging, a copy of The Secret Garden in his lap. The book his mother had given him just that morning. Golden afternoon light spilled through the windows, turning his brown hair the color of honey. In the little nook behind the counter, Marina sat in front of an old typewriter she'd kept since her internship days. Not for invoices or inventory, but for letters. Letters she wrote only to herself. She rested her fingers on the keys, took one quiet breath, and began to type. Dear Marina, if you're reading this someday in the future, maybe when your first silver strand of hair has appeared, or when Leo is taller than you by a full head, let this be your reminder. You once walked out of a house you thought would always be home. You once stood in the middle of a ballroom while people laughed at you and did not bow your head. You once stayed silent for too long, but in the end, you chose to speak. And most of all, you never forgot how to love yourself, even when no one else offered to do it for you. Leo will grow up and not remember much about the Ellis estate, but he'll remember that his mother held his hand and walked away from a place that had stopped being safe. He'll remember the first hug after the party and the look in the eyes of the man who stood up for her. Not like a hero, but like someone who simply saw her for all that she truly was. Damian came to the cafe a week after the engagement ended. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. He placed a small cloth bag of sunflower seeds on the counter and said, I thought you and Leo needed something that grows upright, without bending for anyone. Marina planted those seeds in the patch of soil beside the window. Each day, Leo watered them, and each morning, he checked to see if the first sprout had emerged. Marina knew there would come a season when they would bloom,